Are we live? I think we're live. We still got music going on, but that's okay. So everybody, thank you for joining us for another edition of Beyond the Headlines. We were supposed to have Janine here today, and let me shut one thing off here. So Janine, actually, everybody knows that South Africa has power outages. And yesterday, she was helping with questions during the Ukraine update. And the power just came back on just before the stream. And we were hoping that that was going to happen today with her. But she said it was a stage 3 outage. Well, today was like a monster stage 6 outage. And we can't overcome that, and she's not able to be here today. But I still want to mention that we have a fundraiser for Janine because she has some medical issues that she came back from Ukraine with. She's got a shoulder issue, she's got an elbow issue, and in South Africa, their medical system is a little strange. So she doesn't have any insurance, and she needs some money for some medical costs. So you can through the Shills, and Chris Lundy can also drop Janine's link, which will help her because it'll go right to her PayPal. So going on to, thank you, Commander McMillan, for today and taking everything on your shoulders. The Q&A and all the stories. Speaking of Q&A, it's a perfect day to do Q&A with Commander McMillan because we have lots of time. We are going to bring up some headlines that I saw today, and there's one thing that is in South Africa that actually goes back to the United States, so we're going to bring that up a little bit later. So we were talking before the show started about there was an article that said President Zelenskyy was willing to resign if there was automatic acceptance into NATO. And first of all, my heart just broke because he's such a great president. But Commander actually has a different point of view. Commander, can you tell us a little bit about your point of view and whether it happens or
not? Your sound is a little glitchy, so I was hoping you could repeat that so I knew what you had asked.
Okay, hang on one second here. I'm gonna do one thing. Can you hear me better now?
I can hear you fine, but it just glitches at random times.
Okay, I might have to go in and out.
That sounds better.
Okay, what we were talking about, there was the headline this morning that right. President Zelenskyy said that he would be willing to resign for security assurances, admission into NATO. My heart sank. And I had told you that before the stream, that it just broke my heart because everybody loves President Zelenskyy. And then you said, well, think of it this way. It might not be such a bad thing. And then you kind of told me the story about what you know about history. So if you could share that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Using wartime World War II Britain as an analogy here. Churchill was prime minister up until 1945, just before the German surrender. And then he was voted out of office. And the new government came in, and they then had to deal with all the reconstruction issues because Britain had been badly hit during the war, not just with the Blitz, and the V1 and V2 rocket attacks and such, but also just economically. There'd been enormous amounts of dislocation. Rationing stayed active in Britain until like 1951 or 52. So 6-7 years after the war was over, they were still rationing food. So Churchill being voted out of office kind of ended up as sort of a blessing to him, because it meant that the following government then had to assume the burden for solving all of those post-war problems that hit immediately after the war was over. So if you look at from the same situation with Ukraine, when the war is over, which Zelenskyy said he would resign as president after the war was over, it means somebody else is going to end up holding that entire overloaded bag of cow manure that is reconstructing Ukraine after the war. And Ukraine has been, as we all know from all the video images we've seen of the missile attacks and everything, and horrendous casualties they suffered, is going to be struggling to recover. And then you add on top of it some of the economic concessions that the orange shit gibbon's trying to extract from Zelenskyy. And again, it's, further impeding their chance in expeditious recovery. So handing that problem to somebody else for a time would allow Zelenskyy to be viewed as the heroic figure who got us through the war, brought peace, and then wasn't responsible for the post-war mess. He could easily re-enter politics, and get elected as prime minister or president a second time. I think that's one way to look at it. I don't think his resignation necessarily means the end to his political career.
How do you think, let's just sort of do hypotheticals. So say he gets everything that he wants, and this went through my head, so, and better how this could get.
Clarify who you mean when you say he.
President
three
Zelenskyy.
primary actors here. None of them are interested in the same thing.
So there's zero trust in what Trumpty Dumpty is doing with anything. And in the end, his lackeys are over there doing what he says. And Kellogg was over there and wanted to do a press conference with President Zelenskyy. And then because he said, I don't agree that, Ukraine started the war, Russia did. And then his press conference was nixed at the very last minute. I mean, why even have an envoy? So what I'm thinking is, what are the chances that there's an agreement signed? Yes, we give you everything. And then the United States says, oops, nope, we don't. Is that even a possibility? Or would something like this have to go to Congress? And
it's definitely a possibility, because look at the Budapest Accords. That's a perfect example. The US and Russia agreed that they would guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty if Ukraine surrendered its nuclear weapons, which they did. And the idea was that if something happened, one or the other of the countries would immediately come to Ukraine's aid. Well, how many times did Russia invade before it was finally over, and where we are now? And the U.S. didn't really come in to help them, which was the agreement. So, there's certainly precedent for us writing them off. That's something I think that you got to consider. The other part of it is, if you look at Trump's business dealings, he's really good about promising the world and then delivering absolutely zilch to the people he makes deals with. So it's, I would think, almost a guarantee that anything that Trump promises isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
I agree. I think we've seen President Zelenskyy make some, let's just say, political maneuvering statements, because he's also playing the game. He knows Trump. Yeah. He's not stupid. And he's got some great advisors too. And I love that he's jumped into the ring and pulling all the same stuff that, the U.S. is pulling on them, and coming back with the, as far as we're going to talk about the mineral rights agreements and things like that, and kind of what the latest is a little bit after this. But I do admire President Zelenskyy for being so savvy on the political arena, especially in light that President Zelenskyy says, oh, well, yeah, he's an accomplished comedian, but not much else. Or President Trump said, and that was so insulting. So let's just...
well, by that measure, Trump himself is nothing more than a failed reality TV host. So
that's true, with a lot of
at
lawsuits
least I
from
don't
women.
mind watching reruns of Servant of the People with Zelenskyy because it's funny. There's nothing amusing about any of the crap that
Trump has done. Absolutely. I just want to mention again that today's a great day for questions with Commander McMillan. Everybody loves when he answers questions. Please tag at Lancer MacMan in the chat, or you can tag me. Our names will light up, and we'll see that there was a question asked. There's probably some questions or comments in there, but since we're not tagged, it is kind of hard to see because we got a bunch of screens up here.
I'm going to ask you to read them to me because my eyes are kind of giving me problems today. So
yeah,
I can make out like every second word.
We were talking before the stream. I said, oh, just a minute, I gotta go. And I grabbed a bunch of tissues. It must be allergies. You got crazy rain up there. And
with me, it's not allergies. It's cold. So I have a little space heater running in here, and the hot air dries my eyes out, which makes it hard to see.
Okay.
So I have a choice. I can either freeze or not read.
Okay. Whitefishy said you just sent one to Commander. Did someone pick that one up? Let me just see if we got that.
One from Whitefishy. Yeah, he said, respects to the U.S. pausing aid to Ukraine. How do you see intel sharing with Ukraine?
Oh, I see it. Okay. With respect to U.S. pausing aid to Ukraine, how do you see intelligence sharing with Ukraine? How does the Five Eyes affect this?
The new director of national intelligence is Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi has been very outspoken that Ukraine is a criminal state. And, she wants to see Russia crush those fascists. So that should tell you what's going to happen to intel sharing, I think. And how will that impact things for the Ukrainians? Quite a bit, because it means deep strikes into the Russian rear, which have been causing so much difficulty for them, become much harder to prosecute because you don't get the satellite imagery. Now, Britain and France both have access to their own satellite imagery, which they might be willing to share with the Ukrainians. I don't know. Would that make up for it? Perhaps, but not entirely, I would think, because heretofore they've probably been getting it from 3 sources. Now they're down to just 2. So I think that addresses the question.
I was shaking my head. Tulsi Gabbard, I still just have no words for her. And being a veteran, I don't know about you being a veteran officer, but to think that this person is helping to do this to the country that we fought for, it's like a knife. And I don't understand it because in general, I don't know, I can't speak for you, but I know when I was in and my friends were getting deployed, I did a couple very limited mission things. We didn't always, for the most part, we didn't always agree what was going on, but we still did our duty. And I think that's the way a lot of military people feel. And I know more military people after we got out that they are not of Tulsi Gabbard's mind. They're more with the mind of the predecessors and the people that went before us who just were really huge icons in the military community. And the statement, I don't know if you've probably heard this statement. It says like the current people who are in the military, we stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us. And Tulsi Gabbard is just an absolute nightmare. So,
well, I think it's worth noting Gabbard herself is a military veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a lieutenant colonel. And she deployed on a number of occasions to different areas, including Iraq, in the combat zone and such. So one would think she would have a somewhat more realistic view of who our friends and enemies are and what we can do to help the people who are our friends and so forth. But I think she's so bogged down with the cult of personality and the attempt to further her own career by, jumping on the MAGA bandwagon and everything, that none of that matters anymore. And it's interesting that initially she was being seen as a Democrat in terms of, which party she would support and the policies she was pushing. And, she's basically done a 180 now. So, yeah, I think that tells you all you need to know about who she is and what she's likely to do.
And I love your point about not recognizing who our enemies are. It's so blatant. And I have so many thoughts going through my head. I probably shouldn't think out loud, but I
just think George Orwell, 1984. Traditionally, East Asia has always been the enemy of Oceania. And it's the same nonsense going on here, which is whatever the golden god king says, that's the new reality. If he wakes up tomorrow and says Mars is our greatest threat, I guarantee you that the MAGAs would be spouting all this crap about Martians infiltrating the country. It's just,
and the photos that would show up. That's the part I would like to see. This one was in my backyard last night. So then all the Sasquatch people would come out and
looks like a raccoon to me, Bob.
Exactly.
Oh no, that's a mask he's wearing to camouflage his lizard features.
Oh my gosh. So I want to call out Brit, the Ukraine mission. He's in our chat, and I want to thank everybody yesterday who donated to his body armor needs. He's actually getting the Virtus system. We had a really good turnout as far as viewers, but also support for him. And if you're here today and you did donate to him yesterday, thank you, thank you, thank you. He's able to, I think, get most of his kit without touching his salary, we hope. And that brings me again as a reminder to Janine. Janine and I will be doing probably a taped stream because she's not here because of the power outage in South Africa, which yesterday it was minuscule, so she was able to be on with us yesterday as far as in the team, but today it's massive. It's just a all-day blackout, massive, huge area. And I actually saw the little notice they put on they sent to everybody's phones. So yeah, pretty disappointing because it means no internet, no lights, no air conditioning, no anything. So keep her in your thoughts. And if you can possibly support her for her medical costs, she needs some work on her shoulder, her elbow. She worked some days, I know I touched base with her would be like her morning. And then my entire day would go by and she'd still be working. And I'm like, you're on your 14th, 15th hour day or hour in the day. What's going on? And she's like, Annette, I got to get this stuff done. It's got to be vacuum packed and sent out to the soldiers, the training camps, everything. So she put in some major hours. And in a very short period of time, she ended up with some pretty serious repetitive motion injuries. And also we're going to talk about this when she's here, but there's some PTSD going on there. We've got some great video of some of the experiences that she went through while she was in Krasnodar. I'm sorry. Oh my God. I can't believe I said that. That's Russia. One of the places that they bombed a couple days ago is in my head. She was in Zaporizhia. We can say that now. One of the kitchens got bombed and destroyed. And then she was in Kyiv for a while. And then they built another kitchen. I think it was about 30 kilometers from the zero line, but there was constantly drones and missiles. And we've got some video when we taped that for you. So she's dealing with some pretty significant issues. And I'd really appreciate if you could help her out. We dropped her link in there, and you can also use the Shills Ko-Fi link. That's working out really, really good right now because the funds come in, and we were able to get Brit his money. We'll be able to get Janine her money, so you can use her Ko-Fi or our Ko-Fi, whatever you're comfortable with. So we really appreciate that. So, Commander, to pivot, a couple days ago, I said to Commander, whatever you want to talk about, think of some things you want to talk about. But the one thing I did do, I said, we need to hear some stories because he's got some funny stories from the Navy. So he gave me 3, and I get to randomly pick. So we are going to go with the sleeping bag story.
Okay. So the sleeping bag story. During the invasion of Iraq and the lead up to it, I was deployed as a liaison at the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. And one of the things we had to do as it became increasingly evident that, we were going to be going into Iraq, they started running chemical drills so that, if the Iraqis fired these mysterious weapons of mass destruction they allegedly had, and put a chemical round into the compound of the U.S. base in Bahrain, that we'd all have been thoroughly drilled in how to put on our MOP gear, our chemical protective gear, and our gas masks and such. So dutifully, once a week, we went through this drill, except the guy who was the department head of the group I was part of decided that he was too important to waste time doing such drills. So every week, whenever the drill would come up, he always had some other very important meeting he had to attend to, and he'd be gone. Well, eventually the war starts, and we receive an alert from the radar detection systems that there is potentially a missile inbound towards Bahrain. Now, it can't really tell you if it's going to hit Bahrain. All they know is there was a missile that was fired out of Iraq heading generally in that direction. In point of fact, this missile was being fired at ships in the water, and it impacted the water and did nothing. But we didn't know that. So the chemical alarm goes off, warning everybody on the base to don their gear, just in case. And so everybody does so. And our boss, who's in his office, we hear this stomping around and this cursing, and suddenly he's screaming out, "Help, help, help." So we have no idea what's going on. So we run over and open the door, and our glorious boss, who, obviously didn't need to trouble himself with learning how to put on his MOP gear, had been trying to climb into a sleeping bag. He couldn't tell the difference between MOP gear and a sleeping bag, and had tangled himself up in it and fallen over and gotten trapped under his desk. So we're all in our gear, laughing our asses off, trying to drag him out from under his desk and get him unrolled from this stupid sleeping bag. And then we finally, okay, here's how you put the thing on, boss. And so that shows you that even the bigwigs need to do their training.
I have a question about and because I always go back to this because that's where my brain goes. But were these Scuds that were coming in, or were they different types of missiles?
There were a number.
Okay.
The Iraqis had purchased all sorts of different missiles. And then after purchasing them mostly from the Russians, they'd further modified them. So one of the missiles that we knew they were using to allegedly fire chemical warheads was an old anti-ship missile. I mean, a 1950s era anti-ship missile, which they knew would have no value shooting at ships because countermeasures had gotten so sophisticated since then. This thing would have no chance of hitting a target. So they repurposed it as a land attack missile with a chemical weapon on it. Now, that is the kind of thing they did. But yeah, all the weapons they had, for the most part, were very inaccurate. So it's kind of like with the Germans in World War II. You shoot a V2 and this is going to hit London somewhere. We don't know where. It could land in a field. It could hit the Houses of Parliament. We don't know. It's in London somewhere. And that's the kind of level of accuracy the Iraqis were dealing with when they fired their weapons.
Well, and you can, a lot of people thought, well, if they, had if they thought they had a high value target, it would miss. But that was more of a problem because you didn't know where it would hit, and it could actually have been, an American base, or they were extremely. It was, I know from the, the people that I talked to, and it was an extremely tense time because they would just scramble because they didn't know where these things would land. Now, Scuds in general were kind of a joke because, flying trash cans and the stuff they put inside of them and things like that. Yeah. But I mean, just garbage. They put nails, and I don't, know if that's what your experience, but I had seen photos of just garbage inside of these things to use as projectiles. And then some of them even landed. They landed and they didn't even explode. They just went thud, and that was it. So there we got a couple. Thank you for that story. I love your stories. I know. I
want to tag on to that a little bit.
Okay.
And this is another story. Same period. Not as humorous. So it's just this thing of Iraqi missiles that led to the one time I was threatened with court-martial. So what happened was we had a battalion of Navy Seabees. CB is a kind of a contraction of construction battalion, CB. And they were up in Kuwait, and their job was to help unload all the cargo ships we're bringing in, military equipment and supplies through the various ports up in Kuwait. The trouble is they were shore-based, but they were tied into the Navy communication system. So what this meant is that when the Iraqis would fire a weapon, if it was going out to sea, they'd be notified that, oh, there's a weapon inbound, and they'd all busily get into their protective gear, as would the ships. But if there was an actual round being fired at the land targets, which they would have been in the key ports that we were offloading everything through, they weren't tied into the Army's notification system. So they didn't get told when there was a round inbound. So Navy guys would be out in their PT gear jogging, and all the Army guys are wrapped up in their protective gear. So the battalion commander of the Seabees sent me a message and said, look, I need your help in getting this sorted out because I keep trying to get switched over onto the Army warning system for inbound ordnance. And I keep getting stalled out because, it's crossing service lines. We can't do that. I need your help. Can you please get somebody at Fifth Fleet to help me unscrew this mess? So I did exactly what he wanted. I sent out a general email to everybody at the Fifth Fleet headquarters and say, hey, I need some help. We have a critical situation, and I described it. And within an hour of sending that out, I got called by the chief of staff, the admiral's chief of staff, and told that I needed to report in at 5 o'clock in the morning to him to be read charges for court-martial. And the reason for this was because by sending it out to everybody in Fifth Fleet in the headquarters building, it was a potential source of embarrassment that this was a problem. So they were far less concerned with the safety of the Navy personnel than they were with their own image of everything is perfect. I dutifully forwarded a copy of the email I got from the chief of staff to my admiral and to the battalion commander for the Seabees and some other folks that I knew. And they basically rounded up all the dogs and ponies and said, look, you can't do what you're talking about doing because he's did exactly what we asked him to. And he solved the problem. And within 2 hours of him sending that message out, we were back on the Army's warning system. So he did exactly what we wanted and accomplished the mission. So you're threatening him with court-martial for doing this is absurd. And so the chief of staff then decided, well, have him wait in my in the foyer outside my office, and then I'll see him at 10 o'clock. Remember, I was supposed to see him at 5 in the morning. Then it was 10 o'clock. Then it was 1 o'clock, and finally at 3:30 he called me in to get, well, you shouldn't have done it that way. You should have gone to the communications officer. And I said, I don't know where he is on this base. I don't know who it is. And this is something that needed to be taken care of right away. And I didn't know what lines of command and control that it crossed. So we wanted an immediate action. That's why I did it. Well, rumph. So that shows you the kind of people that often get pushed into higher positions. They're careerists who are very happy with their own careers and don't really pay attention to the actual mission.
That's very true. And we see, you being an officer and me being enlisted, we saw it throughout our ranks too. You had people that were just, they didn't even care if someone's life was in danger. It's like, we have a way to do this. You got to do it this way. We have an order of operations. We have a command, hierarchy. And yeah, it sometimes gets in the way of doing the right thing, but I'm glad you ended up okay and not court-martialed.
So
go ahead.
Nick just said, was that really the only time you were threatened with court-martial? Okay. Yes, there was another time, but I wasn't threatened with court-martial. I was told to stop doing something, or there might be a recall order, which might lead to court-martial issued to me. And in that case, it was because we offered up the CBs had finished doing most of their job of offloading transports. And people were talking about, well, we really need to open the Iraqi port of Qasr because that's where all the humanitarian relief supplies are supposed to come in. Okay. So I talked to my admiral and the battalion commander. I said, do you guys have a potential solution? The battalion commander said, sure, I don't have anything to do. I've got trained personnel. I've got the material. I can provide my own security and I have my own transportation. I can get to Qasr and have that place up and running within a week. And then I was told through the channels that, no, we don't want to hear anything about this ever mentioned again. And it was because a no-bid contract had been let to Brown Root and Kellogg and Halliburton to rebuild the port of Qasr. Vice President had ties with those companies, and we don't want to impact their ability to make maximum profits if the military can solve the problem all by themselves. Yeah. Another Republican administration doing its part for America.
Did
that come out of my mouth? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that.
I guess because I had my brush with serious court-martial towards the end of my enlistment. And in the end, it turned out I was doing the right thing, but that's not what it came up with. And do you think that, and this is just your opinion, I know for enlisted, there was really no wiggle room. We could make any excuses. If you did something wrong, is it different for officers in the Navy? It seemed to me it was because of what I saw them get away with. But again, this was just my command. I didn't know.
In my experience, and having been in a position where maybe not court-martial, but non-judicial punishment that potentially could be referred to court-martial, as that worked its way up through the system on your ship, there were multiple chances for people, as in the cases that I mentioned, for people to come in on your side and say, look, this isn't warranted. We shouldn't do this. And that often happens. So you'd get somebody who made some stupid screw up, and you didn't want it to go down in his record and impact his chances for promotion. He was a good guy. He just did something dumb. So, their chief petty officer or the leading petty officer from their work center or their division officer, or the department head or whatever, would come in and tell you, look, we'd like to not push this all the way, but we need to make sure he understands the gravity of the mistake he made so he won't repeat it. So I think it's kind of the same, but I think it works at different levels, and it works a little more behind the scenes for an enlisted man than it does for an officer.
That makes sense.
For an officer, you kind of have to self-advocate to a degree.
Mm-hmm. Sometime I'll tell the story about, I've told you personally what happened, and I don't expect you to remember. It's okay. But it's a really tough, hard story to tell. And it ended up turning out okay. And in the end, it ended up changing things for the better for a lot of people. I didn't find out until after I got out. And it kind of came up recently. I think I showed you my pin that I got. For those viewers that know me and have heard me on the other Shills programs, you all know that I moved from Iowa to Reno, Nevada, to get out of the tornadoes and just get back to my people and better weather. But just a little ways away from where I live, there's a park that had a tent set up, and it was for Vietnam Veterans of America. And they were promoting some donations and also awareness of the different what the display in the park was going to do for everybody, and really, really nice people. And then they said, well, hey, are you interested in helping us? And realize I probably am more of a candidate for VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, but I don't know if anybody remembers that our team member Skidscrasher, he's actually former Army, and he's heavily involved in outreach in Chico, California. And he's told me a lot about Vietnam Veterans of America, and it's going to die out. And I'm part of, since I'm not a Vietnam veteran, of course, there's they have the auxiliaries, which is what I joined, and they love having veterans in there. As a woman veteran, they love it even more because you're doing something for the shoulders of giants that we stood on. So, but I've got these little mini pins. Commander knows what they are. When you get your ribbons, you get these mini pins, but also you can get like little hat pins that have your medals on it. And the medal that I got for what happened to me in the military is bittersweet. And I was pulling those out because they're like, oh, wear your pins next to your VVA pin or your AVVA pin. And we want everybody to know that we have a woman veteran among us. And I pulled them out, I put them on, I took them off, I pulled them out, I put them on, and then I made an excuse. I said, I just didn't really know the order to put them in, which is sort of true because it's been forever since I've had a uniform on, and all the ribbons and everything has to go in a certain order. And usually, if you don't know, there's somebody around you that can tell you. And Google didn't do me any good on that. So I kind of use that as an excuse. So, Commander, I probably will be hitting you up and showing you and saying, hey, what order do I wear these in?
Well, I'll tell you what I know, which is that those mini pins, typically you only wear the highest award that you got. You don't wear multiples. You only
I read that. Yeah. So I have the Navy Achievement. which was the congressional ones. Or so it's, I mean, a lot of people get it, but it's important because it's worth promotion, and I got it getting out for what I did. So, but
I mean,
yeah.
it's like I have senior awards, but the one that I'm proudest of is an Army Commendation Medal. Because how many Navy people get an Army medal?
What's that for?
For work I did with the Army in terms of exercises and drills in preparation for the offload that we did into Kuwait in preparation for the invasion. So I took over, and they hadn't had a joint exercise with the Army in 7 years or something. I took over, and we conducted, for the 3 years I was at the command that I was responsible for that, we conducted one exercise a year, each one larger and larger than the one before, involving more personnel, more units. So by the time it was time to do it for real in Kuwait, everybody knew exactly how to do it, what was required. We'd done it every time, before. So that's the way you do things. It's practice makes perfect,
There was so much disarray because there was so much peacetime prior to that. I know, and I won't go into it, but the stuff that we saw on the medical side, I don't think people really know how, I can't even find the word for it. It was just disarray. We had at the hospital, I will just say, we had bus loads of Marines coming in, bus loads. Every clinic in Naval Hospital San Diego was full for something. And and you look at these guys, and they didn't, you'd love to say, yes, they joined because they wanted to, defend the United States. But the thing was, at that time, most of them joined for the GI Bill. A lot of people did. And it was a good time because, we didn't have any conflicts, and it was a real test of everybody. And it was a pretty scary time. So anyway, that's all I'll say about that. I would love to go to some questions here. We've got some good ones in here. Let's see, questions. This actually came up yesterday. Oh, wait, where's one? Let's see. Oh, where was that? Okay. So, Commander, yesterday I don't know if you noticed in the news brief, I put a little note next to a post that I put. I have no idea if this is real, but it was kind of mind blowing, and I forwarded to a few people for comment, and they're like, "Well, I believe it." And it's Dolores Chasen said at Lancer McMillan, any way to fact check the latest, Trump was enlisted by KGB in 1987 and call sign Krasnov. That was a headline, and I put it in you guys' news brief, and it wasn't discussed because I think it was in a periodical that was a little bit questionable, maybe. But can you comment on that? Did you see it at all?
So there's two elements that really need to be addressed so people understand what's the issue here. The first is what he was. The article doesn't say he was a spy. He was recruited, but it doesn't explain that. So intelligence services, and I kind of know this a little deeper than some people because my father was a 26-year CIA officer. And you have what's called a target of interest. So these are people who can be scientists, businessmen, politicians, military officers, whatever. They don't know that you're using them to gain information. And the stuff you're telling them, you may not be aware is something that they're interested in. So it's entirely possible and likely that early on, Trump was identified as a target of interest. And they found that he was relatively open and loose with his lips and told them lots of stuff. So he, at that point, became elevated from a target of interest to an asset. He still probably had no idea he was being used in that manner. That's the difference between an asset and a spy. A spy is somebody who knows what he's doing, knows it's wrong, and he's doing it for whatever reason, ideology, personal gain, blackmailing him, what have you. But he knows what he's doing is wrong, but he's doing it anyway. An asset has no idea he's being exploited. And given Trump's gullibility and ease with which he can be manipulated by people who understand them, I think it's entirely likely that that's what they mean. Now, they gave him a code name. That's normal, because when you send transmissions between your station in, say, New York back to Moscow saying, we have a target of interest slant asset, you don't want to say, it's Donald Trump. Because if somebody's reading your mail, you know, breaking your codes, and even as much as people like to say, oh, yes, our codes are unbreakable, smart people realize any code can be broken. So rather than doing that, you simply assign him a code name. And you make sure that when you talk about him, you don't divulge any information that might be attributable directly back to that source. So that would be why this guy was assigned to exploit target of interest slant asset Trump, who was also known by the code name Krasnov. So I think that's more likely than what a lot of people are saying, was that he was recruited as a spy for the Russians. Now, later on, as his business and political career began to mature, I think that kind of changes. I think he starts knowing and realizing he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing, but he's still not doing it directly for, you know, oh, pay me money or something, but he's still getting a payback for it. And one of the key things that gives you an indication that that's the case is that some of his businesses were failing and they got influxes of money laundered through Deutsche Bank from the Russian mob. And the Russian mob has a very much hand-in-glove arrangement with the Russian government. You know, you don't get in our way, we won't get in yours. So I'm sure what happened in those cases is somebody in the FSB or KGB would go to their contact in the mob and say, look, we need you to do this for us. We need you to make sure that this money, which we'll give you, but you need to make sure that money gets to this guy. You can take your fair share cut and, you know, whatever that was, I won't speculate. But that happens. And it takes a real moron to not realize that all of this stuff that's coming through various Russian sources, be they the mob, be it businesses, what have you, to help you, isn't being done just because they think you're a cool dude whose spray on tan is the most sexy thing they've ever seen. So I think that's where we get that whole article. So I think there's a very good chance the article is true, but I think you have to understand how the intelligence world works in order to have a true understanding of what the statements actually mean. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I think you and I talked about this, and I apologize. Sometimes we did it on a stream, and then sometimes we did it in the background because Commander's really great about discussing things, you know, on Discord. But you know, what comes to mind too is the Trump family has had its fingers in government going way back. One of Trump's uncles was implicated in the, what's his name? The guy that did the electricity. Tesla.
Enron?
No, Tesla. We're going way, way back. So there was an uncle, and I apologize. I'd have to look. I don't have the name right, but he was in a government position, which actually was like the government department of international nationalized or some people, and it was to keep track of. It was to keep track of high profile people, and Tesla was on that list. And he was, as far as I understood, he was a fully naturalized American. Or he was at least treated as such. But when he died, that uncle got a hold of the case and said, it was supposed to be handled one way. And he's like, oh, no, I'll handle it. And apparently a lot of things from Tesla disappeared. And I know it's a lot of conspiracy theory and whatever, but there's some pretty good documentaries out there. And at least says, it at least will say who the people were and what government department they worked in. So Trump has had probably a little bit of coaching coming up, and it's not probably been the best coaching. It's like, let's how to pull one over and also deal with foreign governments. And, Trump was probably flattered when he was named something.
I think one thing you need to understand, I think it's a job and the pay is reasonably decent, but I think the majority of people who get into federal service as a GS whatever do so out of a desire to serve their country and their communities, not necessarily in uniform like the military, but they want to provide a service and they're getting paid to do so. They have good intentions. But I think once you get past a certain point and those positions get into what's called the SES or Senior Executive Service, which are all appointees. And I think a lot of those people get into government service. It's for relatively short periods, certainly in most cases no longer than 8 years for the re-elected administration that put them in the position. I think in many cases they're doing so because it's a way to influence things and to use their position for either personal gain or to benefit their friends. And I've never felt comfortable with the SES service because, and I'm not saying they're all this way, but so many of them seem to get investigated and forced out for some sort of wrongdoing, maybe not major wrongdoing, an administration just wants to get rid of an embarrassment. But yeah, those are the people I have trouble and concerns over. And that's one of the things I think with this whole Doge thing that Musk is running that makes me really, really nervous is that what he's doing is gutting and flushing all of these long-term people who work their way up the federal service GS ranks to get into positions where they could do important work and knew what they were doing. And most of those are now being replaced by hand-picked SES people. They don't go through a nomination process. You just, Bubba signs a letter and now you're the director of the DOD Inspector General's office, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think we're going to see corruption just rocket through the roof as more and more true, hardworking, honest federal employees are cashiered to allow the GOP slant MAGA bloodsuckers to take over those positions.
Exactly. And what people, because I'm more tuned into the veteran community than a lot of people too, what people don't realize is a lot of these people that go in are veteran military. They've done a lot of years already in the military, and then they're going into being a GS worker. Now, there is a priority for hires, but especially if you're a disabled veteran, the work environment is a lot more understanding, but a lot of people, they don't.
But that's all DEI, so that's going away.
Yeah, exactly.
No, seriously.
Oh, I know it is. And I see all over comments of things on the news that, well, it was initially they said, oh, it's the people who are in probation. They haven't done as much time. I've seen comments from people that are 10, 15, 20 years. They were career military, retired, and now they went career GS. And what there's one point that was made to me last night is, and a lot of people in civilian world don't understand this. Those of you who are veterans are, the transition from military. I don't care if you've done 1 year, 5 years, 25 years, you're conditioned. They break you down and they build you up the way that you serve the military the best. And you do a job until it's done for the most part. If you know, civilians maybe finish work at 5 or whenever their shift is done. In military, if you were, put out doing something and it was supposed to take 8 hours and it takes 13, who cares? You work until it's done. That's a huge problem in civilian life, because if you work 1 minute over the time that you're allotted to, HR gets on you. And in California has a thing where if you go over on the time clock, whoever you're working for can get fined $10,000 a minute. It's a crazy thing. And all we're doing is going, we're hard workers. We finish the job. That mentality does not transfer into the civilian world. I had a real hard time with it. I think I still have a hard time with it. But what's nice about working in GS positions, and whether you're VA administration or other ones, it's a little bit more understanding that way. And at least that's what I've gotten from other people. And it's also one of the main things that veterans need to be told when they get out is, hey, you might want to work till the job is done. You're an exemplary employee. You will be an exemplary employee, but that doesn't fly. If if you're half done with the job and 5 o'clock, whatever time your shift ends is done, you drop it and you go, because you will be in more trouble for not clocking out or staying and getting overtime than you will if you finish the job. Which
I actually got bit by that. So I was still active duty military. I was assigned to the DOD Inspector General's office. And for, I don't know, maybe the first 6 months I was there or so, I just treated it like any other Navy job I had. You had a project, you worked on that project and that day until it was done, or you knew you couldn't make any further headway, and then you went home. And eventually the person that was running our section called me in and said, look, you need to leave at the end of working hours. I said, I know I'm not staying late, but it doesn't bother me. It's, no, you don't understand. It's pissing off all the civil employees because they think you're doing it to make them look bad. So after that, it was like, okay, it's time to go home. Whatever, just fold the folder and put it over here and go home.
Yeah, and it just doesn't feel right. It's like an itchy sweater. I just wrote to everybody. We've got some great questions here, Commander. We are in an hour now, and I do have a 2-hour time slot. Are you okay to answer more questions for everybody?
Sure, absolutely.
Perfect. Let's go to that. Let's see. Okay, I'm just going to kind of go in order. They're all different topics. From JPH, this was a little while ago. Can you foresee the EU, UK fabricating some of the drones Ukraine has developed up to production? I guess that goes to their ability to produce their own weapons and things with drones.
Absolutely. The issue, though, is how they get produced. So because Ukraine is currently on a wartime footing, I'm sure that they have kind of put all the, putting out specs for bids and getting bids and then evaluating all the prototypes that everybody provides. They're just saying, we know you can make this. We need 300 of them. Make them and we're going to pay you this much. The trouble is with all the other NATO countries, Britain, France, Germany, whoever, they're still in a peacetime operating mode. So even though they may have fully formed specs and designs of how to make something, they still have to go out and have companies submit bids to produce that item in their own country. And then they have to go through the evaluation process and all of that. So it'll take time before they can start producing them. And that's one of the issues you have to deal with when you're dealing with a democratic as opposed to a state-run economy.
Okay. Next question. Let's see. Oh, Grunge thing says, and this is going back to your. Oh no. Okay. This goes back to the firings of all the the high-ranking military. I guess it would be if you were. I'm just going to kind of say this. He didn't say this, but if you were in one of those positions, do you think you would have been fired by now by the orange moron?
But of course, I'm very outspoken in my views. Of course, that's because I'm retired now. I don't have to worry about these things. And in fact, I'm so long in my retirement that recalling me to active duty would be tough. I mean, they could do it simply by signing a paper and doing it. But for the first 5 years after I got out, I did have significant concerns that I might be involuntarily recalled to duty. And that's because I had a skill set which very few people had in terms of all this logistic planning stuff that I had been doing. So assume you get involved in some huge war and you need somebody who knows how to do those specific logistical actions that I did. They might say, well, we've got this guy on file. He's essentially on retainer right now. Why don't we just call him back to duty? That's something else that a lot of people don't really understand is until you hit 65 in the military, you're pretty much, your retirement checks, if you retired, aren't really retirement checks. They're retainers because they can and have done in the past in many situations recall people to active duty against their preference. So that's one of the reasons they did that, that made that specification that technically you don't retire until you hit 65. And then they changed that ruling or the wording of that about 2 years after I joined and made it retroactive, but not to include me. So I just got in under the wire. But yeah, then it started to be when you retire, you don't get your pension check until you hit 65.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was because you weren't getting retainer pay, so to speak. You were just, you get your retirement check when you actually hit retirement age.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't understand that about officers, that they said, well, I might not be using the right words, but you apply for, to get out of the military, but you're constantly it's the needs for you. It's the needs of the Navy. You can be called back at any time because that's the oath you took and that's the conditions that and a lot of people don't understand that. Now enlisted's a little different. When we're out and we would have to rejoin. I think there probably could be something where they might recall us.
They can recall you. I had a chief that worked for me that did get involuntarily recalled. And he was livid because after he retired, he'd gone and started working on a degree, a master's degree in geology. And he was about halfway through that program, and then the Navy said, oh, we've decided you need to come back. And he said, well, that means everything I've done gets, for this master's program, basically gets thrown in the toilet. It's too bad. So, yeah, they can do it. It's not common. In his case, his recall wasn't because they needed him for a specific job, it was because he'd gotten some sort of medical treatment that was extra special, and they determined that he didn't really qualify for it, so he had to pay the government back by coming back to active duty for, I think it was 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard of any cases. I've heard of a lot of cases of people that want to go back, and apparently there's someone they can contact, but it might be a new contract and things like that. For myself, after having been in, I always say that this guy who's in the White House now, he's not my president, but this is still my country. And if I still could offer something, especially in healthcare, helping somewhere, I obviously am not combat, but I would help. I would absolutely help. And there's a lot of, I think that, God forbid, if anything ever comes of that in the United States, it's going to probably be paramilitary that step up before everybody else, before civilians actually say, oh yeah, let me sign up. So, okay, next question. Thank you for that question.
Sure.
There was, okay, next one. From Michelle Ferguson. How feasible is it that Ukraine could make nuclear weapons? How close are they? Or
the Ukraine probably has people who worked under the Soviet Union in the production of nuclear weapons. So the technical know-how is probably there. I don't think the weapons were actually produced in Ukraine. I think they were in some factory out in Siberia somewhere. But creating a factory to produce them would pose challenges, because a lot of the equipment that's needed for that, for example, centrifuges for separating out uranium ore to get the right, what they call it, yellow cake, which is used for the components inside the bomb. And you have to acquire those, and because of non-proliferation restrictions, the moment you start acquiring that stuff, it alerts every other country who's monitoring that sort of thing, and the UN who monitors that sort of thing. And they start saying, wait a minute, it looks like they're starting to develop nuclear weapons. And then you end up like Iran getting sanctioned for what you're doing. But there are a number of nations, and I would include Ukraine among them. South Korea and Japan are another couple of them, who have the skills and the industry to be able to, within a couple of months, get a very viable nuclear program running, and probably be able to produce a bomb within a year, 18 months. The trouble is, having a bomb isn't the end of the program, because then you have to figure out how to weaponize that bomb. Now, in World War II, that was simple. Everybody thought you just take this big device and you load it into a plane. Well, if you go and read some of the actual history behind it, there were only like 2 planes in the world that were big enough to carry those nuclear weapons that were developed in the 1945 period. And it's not that much different today. You have to have a plane that is specially constructed for that purpose. So figuring out how to create just a gravity bomb is a difficult thing. Then you have to figure out fusing. If you want to put it on a missile, that becomes even more complicated. If you want to put it on a sub-launched missile, that becomes even more complicated. And you see where I'm going with this is, yeah, Ukraine could probably, if they went full tilt, get access to nuclear weapons within a couple of years. But would they be usable weapons? That's the real question, I think. And I think that would be a much longer proposition.
Right. And there's questions about, all of the weapons, or, when Russia says, oh, we're going to use our nuclear weapons, there's a question as to even what's even viable and what's usable and what can even be, what's not so old.
People do not understand how much maintenance goes into keeping a nuclear weapon functional. And as much as we like to joke about, the Russians make all these threats about using their nukes, but how many of them actually work? Honestly, that same question could be asked about French, British, Indian, Pakistani, American nuclear inventories. How much money have you been spending on the maintenance? How rigorous have you been in making sure that all of that is done correctly? So your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, the nuclear discussion it's so huge because it's like the chances of anyone ever using one, but using as a threat. It's just that's one thing I have not been able to wrap my head around. The whole, it's just why don't we put all that money more into peace? But I guess I'm a bleeding heart anyway, so I'm not the person to have that conversation. It's just I could wrap my head around weapons, I can wrap my head around defense, I can wrap my head around a lot of things, but just threatening people with the bomb that if somebody uses it, they will most likely be instantly annihilated themselves.
Yeah, that's the terrible reality of nuclear weapons, is that thus far nobody has found a reasonable way of how to integrate them other than mutually assured destruction, which is you use, I use, everything goes out the door into the trash bin. And we've heard proposals or comments of like, well, if they only use a small nuclear weapon and they only use it for a tactical employment in a specific battlefield area, then maybe we don't escalate. Except it's an invisible threshold, and once it's crossed, all bets are off as to what the following actions are going to be after that threshold gets crossed.
Exactly, I agree. We do have a member message from Carl Jacobson, a lot of emojis for supporting Ukraine and other countries which want peace. So thank you, Carl Jacobson, for mentioning that.
He's missing Canada.
I think it's Italy in there. I'm not sure about
that's Mexico, Greenland, and Denmark, and then of course Ukraine. But we've been threatening, or he has threatened Canada with becoming the 51st state. So arguably they should be on there too.
Yeah, there's a lot of good support.
And he corrected himself later on and made 3 of them. Okay, well done, Carl.
And I do want to mention again, Janine was supposed to be on with us today. South Africa has these scheduled power outages. Yesterday, she barely made it to our stream to help, and she did. Today, it was a massive power outage for many hours, and so she wasn't able to make it on. But I still want to ask for support for her. A lot of people are coming back from Ukraine after volunteering, and you don't have to be on the front lines and everything to experience injuries and PTSD, and she needs some help right now, and they don't have, and she's not working. That was partly what we were going to discuss today about why she's not working in South Africa. It's a crazy situation there. But if you could help us support her. We did raise some money a couple weeks ago, but she needs a couple hundred yet she needs some physical therapy for her elbow, for arm, for repetitive motion from working in the kitchen. She's dealing with some PTSD issues herself, and we have a lot of things to cover with that. We'll probably do a recorded stream with her so she can tell everybody about that. So we miss you, Janine, but we support you and love you. And we can be generous with her, really appreciate it. Okay, next question. We have some time for more questions. If you guys want to tag me, they'll get it into the rooms for us. So thanks for keeping those coming. Let's see. The significance of the German election results. AfD came in second, and I saw some comments in the chat about that. I think that's fairly recent news. I guess the people who won didn't want to won. I'd have to look that up. But Commander,
I think AfD is the right-wing party. A would be Arbeit and D would be Deutsche Party. So it's probably German Workers' Party or something, which sounds notoriously similar to National Socialist German Workers' Party. So, yeah, they're probably...
I think we'll probably...
They came in second, but I think that the real question is, how are the other lesser parties stacked up? I mean, if the left or the center can form the coalition, then while the right party may be second and form the shadow government, it doesn't mean that they're in a position of power. But yeah, it's definitely across Europe, arguably across the entire globe, right-wing parties are gaining ground.
Okay, I think PJ CNET's in the Shills account. He said AfD is the far right and are projected second. The conservatives that are projected to win are mid-right, apparently. So we don't have results yet, or we do have results. I don't know. Maybe PJ. He's our news researcher, so he can pull stuff up like crazy. He can let us know. Let's see. Next question. Commander, you walked the military through the age of computers logistically. That must be a completely different animal now. Maybe it's a question, is it a completely different animal now? As far as
the biggest change that was starting just as I was getting ready to leave service. Computers, they'd started integrating those even before I got in. And they were a significant portion of logistics. But the way logistics was run was a pull system. In other words, the unit at the front or forward deployed or whatever would submit requisitions saying, I need X, send me 12 cases of 40 millimeter ammunition, or send me a new truck, or what have you. The system that they were beginning to explore implementing was a push system that was being developed as I got out. And the idea there was that the computers would basically, by using quasi-AI, if not outright AI systems, would make determinations based on normal usage rates depending on a unit's activity, and say, based on my analysis, my being the computer, based on my analysis, because they've been engaged in moderate tempo combat operations, they should now need X number of 40 millimeter cases of ammo sent to them. The unit doesn't ask for the 40 millimeter ammo to be sent. It's just pushed by the system saying, based on the information that I've received, you need this stuff by now. So when it's working correctly, it's great because you don't have to submit, take time out of your day to submit a requisition for things. It just magically arrives when you need it, which is a great idea. Unfortunately, at least with the prototype systems that I was working as an evaluator on, that were being tested at the time, a lot of what was happening was a computer would either underestimate or overestimate requirements. And so instead of getting 5 more cases of 40 millimeter ammo, no, you got 50. So how are you going to haul around the extra 45 cases that you don't really need now, or you're not just going to abandon them by the side of the road. You've got to account for them. So that's a problem. And the flip side was equally true. If the computer says, well, based on my estimate, you should only have expended one case of 40 millimeter ammo. So I've sent you the one case. And you go, no, we've been using our 40 millimeter grenade launchers pretty heavily. We need 5 cases. And then you end up going back to the old system of, having to submit the requisition. But now, because everybody's depending on the push system with the AI, it takes even longer to get that requisition process through the supply chain. So, I've been out of it for almost 20 years now. So where things stand today, I don't know. But those were the problems I was seeing with the prototype systems that were being evaluated at the time I was in.
Yeah, the supply, it kind of reminds me of the subscription systems now, where you sign up for, so, and I don't do that because I would get charged for something and be on my doorstep. It'd be like something stupid like vitamins I thought I'd try, here's this. And I'm like, I'm not even taking these. And so
if somebody sat down and did a study, they'd find that probably 35 to 40% of all magazines that get routed, to people's mailboxes are from people who simply have forgotten they subscribed, and the stuff just magically keeps appearing in their mailbox because there's an auto resubscribe feature that they checked or didn't opt out of. And so the stuff just keeps getting delivered. I mean, both my parents have been gone for almost 3 years now, and I'm still getting magazines from my mother's subscriptions to some of the fashion magazines that she subscribed to. And I keep writing them and say, hey, I don't want this. The individual passed away, 5 years ago. Please stop sending it. And they still show up.
Yeah, we had a heck of a
I know it's not being charged to credit cards, which were shut down and canceled 5 years ago. So what's going on?
Exactly. We're still having an issue with some of the things that my mom had donated to, but also AARP. Somewhere along the line, she forgot she subscribed, and then something else. And and my sister's getting, every once in a while I get a nasty text saying, "Did you sign mom up for something?" It's like, why would I do that? She's just frustrated. But we do have that was our last question. But so oh, actually, Sweet just said, I just found it in here. What? Sweet. We did go over that. It says, what are y'all's thoughts about Zelensky's offer to step down if UA can get into NATO? And we did talk about that. It's a he wants. Commander, can you just summarize that in 2 sentences so she can hear that again? Sweet's one of our long-term listeners.
Sure, no problem. What I said was, look at Churchill's historical record where he was prime minister of Britain through the war years. And then in 1945, before the war in Europe was even over, he was voted out. And then he was able to get reelected in 1951, 6 years later. Why? Well, because the guy who took the prime ministership from him ended up inheriting all the problems of trying to rebuild Britain after the war. Arguably, that would be the case if Zelenskyy stepped down. Whoever took over the job after him would inherit a blivet, And for those of you who don't know the military term blivet, it's 5 pounds of excrement in a 2-pound sack.
Okay.
And that's, I think, the situation. So it's not totally unrealistic, and it doesn't rule out the possibility of Zelenskyy jumping back in at a future date. But I think it's a definite, reasonable, and intelligent offer if it gets him what he wants, which is membership in NATO, so that whatever post-war peace is eventually settled upon, at least Ukraine has security guarantees in place that something like this won't happen again.
Yeah, and sweet, the add-on to that conversation, which I had asked Commander, was that, well, how do we trust any deals that are made? And the point is we can't, because historically deals have been made and they've been broken. And
but joining NATO is a different kind of deal because it's a mutual defense arrangement involving, what's it now, 26 nations or something. And you can count on at least some of them saying, yeah, we'll come to your aid. And that puts the onus on all the other signatories in the treaty to say, yeah, we're going to come to your aid too, because if they don't, then, who's going to come to their aid when they need it?
This brings up another question in my head. Do you think that, Sweet, we had said, and I had commented too, that President Zelenskyy is a very, crafty politician now, and he knows how to, put statements out there and get people talking. But I'm wondering if with this statement, he sees who steps up and says, yes, if you step down, it'll be interesting to see, if people actually come out of the woodwork and who it is, which countries' leaders say, yeah, you know what, we'll support you if you go. I don't know what it'll tell, but it'll be very telling, to use a general statement. So,
I think the key thing is that the longer the war drags on, the greater the donor fatigue, if you will, among the nations that are supporting Ukraine becomes, and the less likely they are to want to continue providing that aid. Russia understands this. So right now, the war has essentially entered a phase where it's a race to see whose will to continue fighting collapses first. And while I don't doubt that Ukraine's will to continue to fight is astronomical, the issue is if they're not getting the hardware they need to prosecute a war, it becomes very, very difficult and very, very costly to continue it. Conversely, the Russian economy is in the toilet. Russian society is suffering. There's open signs of dissatisfaction and borderline rebellion throughout the hinterlands with the central government. So again, it's a race between both sides to see which one has to throw in the towel first.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. So we have, I had asked Commander McMillan to come up with his 3 funny stories because I love his Navy stories. So we are going to go on to another funny story. Is that okay?
Sure. Gotta remind me what they were.
No, I will. No, you don't have like telepathy to my note sheet here. Beep, beep, beep. Salmon loaf story.
Oh, God. Okay. So, one of the things that on shipboard, the mess decks where the crew are fed, they have a rotating menu. Typically, it's a 30-day rotation. So, on day 1, you get pork chops. The next time you get hamburgers. The night after that, you get chicken stew. And you go through this different menu for every 30 days. The trouble is the supply officer who's running the ship's galley has only a limited budget to work with to feed the troops. So every enlisted guy assigned to the ship gets what's called a basic allowance for sustenance. It's his meal ticket, if you will. When you're living aboard ship, as opposed to when you're in port and you get to go home to your family, all of that money goes into the ship's general, not the ship's general fund, but the specific galley fund for maintaining the mess. So if you want to give your ship's crew good food, okay, we're going to have steak once a week or something like that, you have to find a way to cut costs the rest of the week. So one of the things the supply officer on the ship that I was executive officer on figured out was that if you served food that nobody liked, they typically would go down to the ship store and buy, ramen or whatever, and that would be dinner that night. And the one food that was universally loathed was something called salmon loaf. And I don't remember the exact specifics of the recipe card for doing this, and you have to understand the recipe cards are designed for feeding 50 or 100 people or whatever. The recipe card started out with 12 boxes of cornflakes and 5 pounds of canned salmon mixed in a blender. So you can get a sense of just how yucky that must have been. Anyway, one of the things you had on the mess decks was a little suggestion box, and it was for anything the crew wanted to suggest, complain about or whatever. But the main reason it was on the mess decks was so that people could suggest, hey, why don't we serve tacos more often or something like that? Well, over time, one of the things that kept showing up was, please take salmon loaf off the menu. And it was very, very obvious how much the crew loathed salmon loaf. So one day, we went down and we had a ceremonial burning of the salmon loaf recipe card. I called the supply officer out and I said, bring me the recipe card for salmon loaf. And I lit it afire and we threw it in a trash can and let it burn out and said, that's the last time salmon loaf is ever being served on this ship. And the crew was delighted, lots of cheering, and we did whatever else we were going to do. The supply officer, however, got his revenge. He found a copy of or ordered a copy, I don't know, of the recipe card and then mailed it to my wife saying, this is Commander McMillan's favorite dish. Please ensure that when we get back from deployment, you have this waiting for him on the table because he loves it so much. It'll be a great welcome home treat for him. Fortunately, my wife knew that I loathe salmon loaf, but I thought that was a pretty good attempt to get revenge.
There's so many good revenge stories because that's kind of all. And that's why I love talking to Commander McMillan so much, is because we, and I wish we should make more time to do that. I love how we used to do that where a lot of stuff got crazy, but revenge stories, because they're not horrible. Sometimes they can be really horrible if you're truly a hated person in your command, but for the most part, they're just funny things and kind of getting you back, a little bit in a funny way. But I when I was in boot camp, I remember, and this was just talk because nobody was allowed any phones or anything like that. But I want to ask you if you ever saw this. So during boot camp, there's a lot of people, they get assigned to different places, and the galley rotation is one of them that you do in boot camp. And one day, about 3 or 4 girls came.
Allow me to interrupt real quick. Mm-hmm. We need to clarify for anybody who's former Army or Air Force. In the Navy and the Marines, you rotate people through. Every division, every department, every work center has a requirement to provide a body X number of times a year for a 90-day rotation on the mess decks, where they peel potatoes and wash dishes. They're not cooking. They're not cooks. They just assist. In the Army and the Air Force, KP duty is meted out as a punishment because they have specific people, usually contractors nowadays, who do all the cooking and the cleaning. So you have to understand, for the other services, these people are not being assigned to the mess decks as punishment. They're just being assigned there because they're junior and it's their turn to go make fun with the dishwasher. Anyway, go ahead, please.
Right. Yeah. Busted down and put on KP duty is a statement you heard quite a lot if there was a big infraction. And you were lucky if you were busted down, that you pretty much did something really bad. And if you just got put on KP duty, you got by easy instead of, at least court-martialed out or something. But so these ladies came back and they said what they saw on the shelves that had all the food stores, and they were vegetables, peas and corn, beans, whatever. There was a label on them that said grade D, but edible. And I asked a few people, I'm like, did you see this? Is this true? And a lot of people corroborated it. And the thing is I saw a lot of people not eat anymore. Luckily it was just boot camp. And, but I didn't even go to the mess hall that much. I had some stuff. I was put on more admin things for my rotation. And sometimes I didn't even take a lunch because I didn't want to be squaring my corners and marching down to the mess hall by myself. It just felt really weird. So, anyway, we're getting about 1:41. Commander, thank you so much. We'll start doing wrap-ups right now. I just love talking to you. I miss talking to you. And thank you so much for all the extra questions that you took and answered. I do want to take a second here and shill out our PubChat, which is coming up in a few hours here. Actually, yep, in about an hour and a half, I think. But you can go ahead and check the channel for that, and make sure that Chris will drop the link, because for those of you, I think I recognize pretty much everybody here, we have divided the channels. This channel is Ukraine Update and my stream. Then we have the 42 channel, and then we have the Shills Live for PubChat. And Chris can drop a link there so that you can go and just make sure you're subscribed to all of those, so that you make sure you get to the right channel. We do post it in our Discord. Chris will also drop Patreon. Please join the Patreon, because that's where all the information is for the 42 show live taping. And you can make sure that you get in on the level that you want to get in on, because there's going to be a lot of good perks coming from there. So would love to see you in that one. Again, I want to thank everybody yesterday for on the Ukraine Update for helping Brit with his body armor. He was able to get body armor that was better than what he was given. And if some of you don't know, Brit was he survived an attack in their Humvee coming back from the front lines. 2 of his comrades did die. 3 of them were in the hospital, and he was in the hospital with them. And it took a solid month or more to recover from that. And thanks to you, his next rotation, he'll be a lot more safe. And, we just hope that it's the thing that really saves him, because he is front lines, and it's very, very dangerous, the missions that are going on. And Starsky did have he introduced his new, it's not a new nonprofit. It's something that's been around, but it's his brigade. And we did receive some donations from there. So check out Starsky's channel too, because he's supporting his old or his previous brigade. And they have a really good website and a lot of really good things going on in news from their brigade. So go ahead and support him too. We love everybody that's on here, and we wish we could help more people, but thank you for helping the ones that you have. It's hugely making a difference. And Janine, we're going to be back with her. She was in the power outage, and so we'll probably do a taped version of a stream with her. And we did get a Ko-Fi donation, which I do want to shout out for her. Joe Medley, thank you so much, Joe. You're a longtime listener, for $35 for Janine. It really, really helps. Janine's going through some medical issues that some problems she sustained from her volunteer work in Ukraine, and we really want to help her out. Just because people come home doesn't mean they're whole and solid and ready to go again. They definitely need our help. So thank you again for your donations for that, and look forward to us doing a probably like I said, a recorded stream for her. Let's see. Did I forget anything, Commander? Thank you to our viewers and everybody who tuned in. Share, do you want to say share out the new channels, because we're getting a lot of watch hours on those. And but what we need is we need more subs for those. And of course, get your friends to sub here for all the amazing content we do here. So, and Commander, I'm going to let you wrap it up and give us your last thoughts.
Sure. Like I do on the Shills, I'll close out with my usual story or request to everybody that please, if you care about Ukraine, communicate that fact to your elected officials. Let them know via text, email, letter, phone call, whatever, that it matters, because we're already seeing that pressure is beginning to have at least some impact on the current administration. It's minor, but the more pressure that gets exerted, the more likely it is that they will begin to ameliorate some of their more absurd demands. So I think that's an important thing to do. Other than that, stay safe and have a good week.
Thank you. I do want to mention one thing and I didn't forget. I just asked Chris to mention it again. It's the anniversary of when the Ukraine war started, and there's worldwide demonstrations going on. So Chris just dropped the link in. Support in any way you can. If you can go to a demonstration, show your support. Our government, all governments, needs to hear how much we support Ukraine in every way possible. Thank you to our team. Mexigirl Heather Wiley was here today. Chris Wiley was dropping links. PJ CNET was in our Shills account, and Dick Dawson. I don't know. I'm getting tired now. Dick Dawson behind the scenes, helping with all the production, and Dunk was in overseeing things and giving reminders too. So thank you so much. And everybody just say, we want Commander back. So we'll get him on the calendar again. We appreciate you so much. So on that note, we'll say goodbye and Slava Ukraini, Heroam Slava.